Our nuclear deterrent protects us. It is complete, sovereign, and French, through and through. Since 1964, it has explicitly played a role in preserving peace and security in Europe. But, in response to the historic appeal of the future German Chancellor, I have decided to open the strategic debate on the protection afforded by our deterrent to our allies on the European continent. Whatever happens, the decision has always been, and will remain, in the hands of the President of the Republic, head of the armed forces.
OK, let's go to Bloomberg's Olive Crook now, who is standing by in Brussels ahead of another key meeting amongst EU leaders. Seismic changes in the defence space of Europe seem to be coming day in and day out, Ollie. What is expected from the meeting today?
Yeah, Tom, I mean, listen, we've been hearing for months and months from people that this is sort of historic moment for Europe, historic moment for European defense. And frankly, it is now at this point starting to actually feel like one. That is down to what the EU is proposing. That is what is being proposed at the national level. I think a lot of it is already under some of the leadership of Friedrich Merz, the incoming Chancellor of Germany, who really just unleashed an absolutely spectacular package here in Germany to discuss about potentially something approximating €1 trillion worth of spending on infrastructure and defense. You see that illustrated in the German bond market, moves you haven't seen since the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's beginning to not just sound like a historic moment, but really to feel like one. And what the EU leaders are here to discuss today are some of the measures that Ursula von der Leyen laid out a little bit earlier in the week. This is supposed to unleash up to €800 billion worth of different sort of spending actions that could be done at the national level and at the EU level. Just a reminder to some of what those are. We're talking about €150 billion worth of loans that would be extended by the EU. They're also talking about easing the fiscal rules on individual member states of the European Union in order to be able to create more capacity within those nations to spend on defense. And we should say, Friedrich Merz, the incoming Chancellor of Germany, the Germans are lobbying for this. It's the Germans that are lobbying to the European Union to ease fiscal rules across the European sector. This is really the sort of historic moment that these leaders are facing. Where they're going to face some resistance potentially is in the form, as ever, of Viktor Orban, the head of, in Hungary, who will be sort of very resistant to a number of these initiatives. However, they are going to be able to circumvent him potentially on sort of qualified majorities on a number of them. The two areas where they're going to have some difficulty, and this is also what we're going to be watching very closely, Tom, discussed in these meetings, because this was not discussed by Ursula von der Leyen earlier the week. The question of joint debt, issuing joint bonds at the European level. How alive is this discussion at this point in time? I think it's an inevitable conversation in months to come, but is it a conversation that will start now? And then this question of frozen Russian assets, Tom, right? This is something that now is recurring as a sort of potential way in order to get more money funded to Ukraine and also for European defense. We right now have sort of loans backed by the proceeds of those. Are they going to look more seriously at touching those underlying frozen Russian assets under the sort of impetus and the sort of great sort of revolution for European defense that has been started by Donald Trump?
Yeah, at a time when Europe seems to be breaking the glass and reaching for the alarm. What happens in terms of the intelligence sharing? The news yesterday that the US has cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. To what extent is that another wake-up call for Europe, Ollie?
It is, again, it's one of the many wake-up calls. But again, we haven't really had the sense that Europe's been, I guess, awake since November, if you believe the officials and politicians we've been speaking to. It seems to be only getting out of bed, though, right now. And for the Ukrainians, that is a sort of serious issue because all of these initiatives take a huge amount of lag time in order to bear fruit. Zelensky is going to be here in Brussels today. As you mentioned, Tom, we should say that the U.S. has sort of stopped delivering military aid to Ukraine a little bit earlier in the week. That means everything that's also been in transit, everything that's on the Polish border, all of that is frozen. And now we understand also freezing the intelligence sharing, except for they're still giving intelligence apparently that pertains to defensive that could threaten your Ukrainian troops. But again, this all comes to the sort of conversation that occurred in the conversation, we can call it, the sort of blow up that happened in the Oval Office on Friday. And now Donald Trump really sort of aggressively turning the screws. But we should say he could turn the screws a lot further. There are a lot of ways that the United States could exert more influence on Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky, who has, in the last few days made sort of an appeal to say, hey, listen, we're now ready to talk about the minerals deal, sign this thing up. So listen, we'll see how the Europeans can progress this a little bit further. But the wake-up call in Europe may have come in time for the Europeans, but it may have come a little bit too late for the Ukrainians. That being said, the Europeans will be wanting to say, put forward everything that they can for Ukraine. We'll see what they yield at this meeting. From what we understand, they can basically continue to deliver hardware and weapons to Ukraine that can get them at least to the summer. So it buys a little bit of time. But again, the alarm bells are ringing everywhere in Europe, but nowhere more than in Kyiv.